The hardest skill in public health communications isn't knowing what to say. It's knowing when to walk away. It's the communication skill nobody teaches, but I'm talking about it in this episode today. You're listening to the PHEC podcast, episode 435. Welcome to the Public Health Epidemiology Conversations podcast, where we dive deep into the topics that matter most to public health professionals creating change in communities around the world. I'm your host, Dr. Charlotte Hughes Huntley, and today it's just you and me as we explore a topic that bridges different perspectives with the practical wisdom you need to fuel your impact. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this episode. You don't have to engage in every conversation about public health, and trying to do so will burn you out before you're able to make a real difference. Because the hardest skill in public health communication isn't knowing what to say, it's knowing when to walk away. My name is Dr. Charlotte Huntley, and I lead an epidemiology consulting firm that supports large nonprofit organizations and community health foundations. We specialize in a variety of community assessments, workshops, and trainings, ultimately helping our clients communicate their health information in plain language to their community partners as well as the broader communities they serve. Now, the support that we provide often falls in the category of strategic planning and sometimes capacity building. Please reach out to us through our website, drchuntley.com. We'd be happy to meet with you and explore how we might be able to support your organization. Links will be provided in the show notes as well. So the topic I'm covering on this episode today was inspired by a few different things. I was leading a workshop with one of my clients, similar to the kind I just described in my introduction. And during the discussion period of that workshop, a question was raised about how to address misinformation. And during that discussion, we talked about a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you on this episode. This episode is also inspired by something that is seemingly completely different altogether, which has to do with my grief journey. So if you all have been following me for a while, you're familiar with I'm on this very complicated grief journey. And if you're new, I'll just summarize briefly. About 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago now, 2 years and a few months at the time that you'll be hearing this episode, I lost my mother to a battle with cancer. She actually was 90 years old and lived a very full life, and I was her primary caregiver toward the end. And then a year ago, my husband and I lost our son. So it's my husband's only biological child, but my bonus child. And it was in a tragic accident. He was 19, he was in a motorcycle crash, and it has been a very traumatic year. So it's been, like I said, at the time that you're hearing this episode, the loss of my son is about a year and a couple of months. So it's a little complicated because I've got my mother, then I've got my son out of nowhere, which kind of complicated that whole journey with my mother. So I say all that to say my husband was in a grief group, not therapy, but more of a grief sharing group, just kind of navigating this together. And then he did that for about a year, and I just worked with my therapist that time. But this year I joined, so a few months ago, I joined that group, which has been phenomenal, actually. It's a very interesting journey. And the only reason I'm even leaning into this is because I want people to understand you don't know when you'll be thrown onto this grief journey. At some point you will, whatever that looks like for you, you'll experience a loss. And just know that there are great resources out there. So I kind of openly share that because these are traumatic experiences, and I don't lean into it as a deep dive, but I weave it into conversations on these episodes. So in this group that we're in for grief, they have a fall session and then a spring session. And then the group does other activities, outside of those structured sessions to just stay connected. So right now, they announced, let's see, at the time of this recording, they announced, this Surviving the Holidays session, which got my attention because they know that the holiday season can be very triggering for people on this grief journey. So I'm looking forward to actually sitting in on that session. But it made me think about you all and this episode, because I think that this time of year, as you're hearing this, mid-December, if this is released at the time that I'm expecting it to and planning for it, this is a holiday season where regardless of how you celebrate or what you celebrate, it's a time of year where people are likely going to be pulled in with family events and seeing family members and close friends. And it's really likely a high probability that, these conversations about public health will be coming up very naturally in these settings. And some of you may, this can be that triggering piece that, I just described. So as I think about how they're preparing us in the Surviving the Holidays session in our grief group, I thought, well, what a great way for me to kind of bring some of what I want to share in a way that can help all of you with a few strategies as you're, really navigating the holiday season with family and friends, and with so much chaos that has happened across this whole year and how it's impacting public health. It could be a mixture of angles that people, the conversations emerge, and you may be feeling a lot of different mixed feelings about what to do with it. So I just thought that this was a great time to share some guidance, and hopefully that you'll find some of this helpful as we go through. All right. So that's a bit of a backstory of how I kind of put this together. But let's really dive in, because in this series, I've been talking about what is public health and how, really leaning into explaining it in plain language and focusing on making, the conversations we have with our close network of family and friends, our close circle of people. So for those of you who want to help others understand public health, and I say that without judgment. So some of us, if we decide that this is all just too much to do right now, that is absolutely okay. So this is really a conversation I'm having with those of you that have decided that you really want to help people understand, but it can feel a little exhausting. You care about public health. You want your family, friends, and community to understand its value. You're committed to using plain language to make complex ideas accessible. But there's the challenge nobody talks about. And, you can't engage in every conversation, and you shouldn't try. So I'm putting that right up front. This guide, what I'm sharing with you, will help you decide when to step in, when to step back, and how to protect yourself while doing this important work. That is my goal. So I guess another thing I'd like to do is a bit of a reality check. Like, you're already doing enough. Before we dive into strategies, let's just establish something that I believe is crucial. Your mission is to help people in your sphere understand public health, and that's it. So that's your family, your friends, your coworkers, because you may work in an organization where you are the small public health department or expert, but the other people work with you they're not public health trained, may or may not have, there's varying levels of understanding. So your coworkers and your community. All right. So your family, your friends, your coworkers, your community, and that's it. You are not responsible for fixing all misinformation on the internet. You're not responsible for convincing every stranger who's wrong. You're not responsible for defending the entire field of public health. And you're not responsible for being on 24/7. This is the most challenging time in public health history, in my opinion. The work is exhausting. So give yourself permission to be strategic about where you invest your energy. All right. So let's dive in a little further. The core question: is this conversation worth having? I want you to be thinking about that as you're in the circle of friends and family and you feel that the conversation's shifting in that direction. Ask yourself, is this, conversation worth having? That's the core question. But, because not every conversation about public health deserves your time and emotional energy. All right. Here's a framework to help you decide. I want you to ask yourself these 5 questions. And I have some notes to help me stay focused here because I love this topic and I love diving into it, and I don't want it to be too far over one direction or the other. So I've narrowed it down to 5 questions that you can ask yourself. The first question: what's really driving their response? Now, again, a lot of this stemmed from that workshop I just finished with one of my clients. So a lot of this is fresh from that conversation. So what's really driving their response is your first question. So genuine confusion is, really looks like asking questions rather than making accusations. So if they're asking questions, not accusations, that's a sign that there's genuine confusion that's driving their question, right? Expressing frustration because they don't understand, which in my opinion is acceptable. people are genuinely frustrated, and it's not all from a place of hate and ready to fight. Sometimes it's just from not understanding. Also, genuine confusion looks like, their willingness to hear your perspective. And then also seeking clarity, not trying to win. And you can usually tell. So an example is, I don't understand why we need public health if we have doctors and hospitals. So that's a fair question to ask because they're genuinely don't understand. And it appears as, it could appear that they're really trying to understand, not trying to argue, fight with you. So looking for an argument looks like this: accusatory tone and gotcha questions. Every time I look at that part of my notes, I have a family member, their little face pops up. So you all have those people around you. Another example of, a cue that they may be just looking for an argument is not listening to your responses. Also, repeating talking points regardless of what you have to say. Like they just really don't care what you have to say. They're just in a loop. And they're more interested in being right than understanding. So those are some cues that they're looking for an argument, not really that they're genuinely confused and wanting to have a conversation. They're just looking for an argument. So here's an example. You public health people ruined everything with COVID. Okay, so that's an argument. They're just waiting for you to engage in that. All right, so the gray area, because everything is not black and white, confusion masks as anger. So sometimes, they can really be angry and also confused. So sometimes frustration comes from not understanding. And this is where it falls in that gray area. Their tone might be harsh, but there are real questions underneath. Listen first to figure out which it is. And I would say, really trust your instincts here. If somebody is genuinely confused, this is your opportunity. If they're just looking for a fight, your energy is better spent elsewhere. My opinion, I'm looking to protect you here. But I have some friends that will dive into everything, and it's exhausting. And so I'm just helping you with some cautionary points here. All right, here's the second question that I'd like for you to be able to ask, the second of 5 questions. And that is there mutual respect? All right, mutual respect means both willing to listen to each other. You're willing to listen to them, they're willing to listen to you. There's disagreement without personal attacks. And if you've experienced this, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. If you have not experienced this, then just know that it's possible, right? You can disagree without there being personal attacks. Mutual respect also looks like they acknowledge your expertise, even if they don't agree. That's huge. And then also reciprocity. They listen, you listen. All right. Now, red flags for no respect include name calling or inflammatory language, dismissing your expertise outright, talking over you constantly, making it personal rather than about the issue. I feel like all of us have experienced some form of that. So those are red flags that there is no respect. And then the just want to be heard exception. Sometimes people seem disrespectful because they're frustrated. If you let them vent first without being defensive, sometimes that's a solution, right? And then many will shift to actual dialogue once they've felt that they've been heard. I think that goes both ways. I know that I've experienced that, and I've been in situations with family members and conversations where I've allowed, because I allowed them to speak and vent, using air quotes that you can't see here, but I allow them to vent. As long as there's the respect, then sometimes I can allow that space for them. I can hold that space for them because I've also experienced how they shift to actual dialogue. Sometimes after they get past that point of letting it out and they see that you're listening, they have that experience, then they shift and they really want to hear from you because it creates that reciprocity that you need. If you're willing to listen, they just want to be heard. There's that exception, but you have to, watch out for those red flags that I just mentioned about the respect, because if there's no respect, then, if respect isn't present and can't be created through listening, then walk away. You deserve better. Here's a third question I'd like for you to be asking. What's your relationship with this person? Right? So close relationships are, often worth more investment because you have history. Your voice carries more weight with them. You can also have an ongoing conversation over time. Okay, so here's an example. An elderly parent hesitant about vaccines. You listen to their specific fears, share why you're concerned for their health, connect it to protecting grandchildren, for example. It takes multiple conversations, but you reach understanding. So it's incorporating everything that I just shared with you. Multiple conversations, you're listening, you can give back, you can respond back with the example of their grandchildren, and helping them to be able to understand a more practical, relatable example for them in that situation. And then, of course, it's not an exact science here, right? But it is an opportunity because you're invested. It's a close relationship. You care more. You have that history and you're really invested in. And this could be an approach it's from personal experience that I've had success using this type of an approach. And it came from my elderly family members around vaccines early in COVID when the first COVID vaccine was available, because all of my elderly family members were just very fearful for different reasons. And so it was me having multiple conversations with them individually and hearing from them is an incredible opportunity for me to learn about their perspective and really help them to understand the importance of the vaccine and answer their questions. And then they ultimately made the decisions for themselves based on facts and understanding that misinformation and fear. So that's the win when you have the opportunity to invest in time and this back and forth a little bit of listening. And then, you listen to them and then they'll want to hear from you and you can go back and forth. And ultimately they make a decision based on solid facts and foundation as opposed to that, misinformation. For professional relationships, you have, these are like colleagues in your community, you have shared goals. Usually those shared goals are present among those colleagues and community. Sometimes that professional courtesy is the baseline, and you can set clear boundaries often between your colleagues and community compared to family sometimes. And sometimes you may have an organizational support in your efforts. So those are just some things to consider around the professional relationships. And then casual encounters, these are really strangers, airport shuttles, grocery store, social media. Choose based on your current energy level. It can definitely change from day to day or time of day, right? And settings and moments. You have zero obligation to engage deeply. Just keep that in mind. So invest more in relationships that matter. Give yourself permission to opt out of random encounters when you're not up to it or you're not up for it. That's absolutely your prerogative. Just reminders here. Some of you are like, oh, yeah, I got this. And some of you are like, oh, wow, I didn't really think about it that way. And you feel obligated to do more than you really need to be doing. All right, here's another question. Number 4 question that I want you to be asking yourself. So what is your capacity right now? Be brutally honest with yourself. How are you feeling in this exact moment? What else is on your plate today? And where are you in your burnout cycle? And do you have emotional energy to spare? Be really honest with yourself. What is your capacity right now? Your capacity changes. Monday morning versus Friday evening, completely different. After a good work week versus during a crisis, your capacity definitely different in both scenarios. When you're well rested versus depleted and exhausted. And when personal life is stable versus stressful, your capacity changes at all these different times. So this is definitely something for you to be considering. You're familiar with the airplane oxygen mask principle. They teach you on the airplane, you put your own mask on first, and then the child or the people in your party that are with you. So you cannot help others understand public health if you're burned out. Your sustainability matters more than any single conversation. If you don't have the capacity, it is okay to say, I can't discuss this right now, or simply stay quiet. Your mental health is non-negotiable. All right. And then the 5th question that I'd like for you to ask regarding these situations, you're quickly trying to assess, the value, whether or not to dive in or not, but what's the setting? All right. So consider Public settings, social media, community settings versus private one-on-one settings. Who else is watching or listening? Consider whether this represents you personally or professionally, and what happens if this goes poorly. Those are just things to consider regarding the setting. Proceed with caution in very public platforms with hostile audiences, in settings where you're representing your organization, in situations with potential legal or HR implications, and in spaces where you could damage important relationships. Okay, so just proceed with caution. And I think some better opportunities exist in private conversations, in settings where you have support, and on platforms that you control, and in contexts where people already trust you. The same conversation in a different setting might have a completely different outcome. So choose your ground. All right, so I'm going to share something I thought this will be a fun way to remember and make it really easy and relatable. I'm putting it in like a green light, red light, yellow light kind of way to proceed. So green light, when to engage. All right, so engage when you see these conditions. Like I said, people who are genuinely confused but not combative, they're asking real questions. Their frustration comes from not understanding. They're open to hearing your perspective. So a recommended approach, which is my approach, is leading with empathy. Understand why this is confusing. Then use plain language, personal stories, and 1 to 3 key points. Make it a conversation, not a lecture. Another green light scenario is you have a trusted relationship. So family member, close friend, colleague, you have a history together. They trust you even when they disagree, and the relationship can withstand difficult conversations. So an approach here could be acknowledge your relationship first, share personal stories. Be patient. This might take multiple conversations. Remember, it's not about winning. It's about helping them understand. Some people need to take a step back and process what they've heard. That goes, ourselves included. We may hear from them and need to process that. Okay, here's another green light when to engage. This is your sphere of influence. So your workplace, your community, your organization, multiple people will benefit from this clarity, and you have expertise to share. This misconception keeps coming up. So if this is like your sphere of influence, there's a lot of, I guess I want to say the return on investment. Your return is really high when it's within your sphere of influence. So prepare, an approach could be preparing some key messages in advance and create space for questions. Use stories. We've heard this so much. Use stories as example. Make yourself available for ongoing dialogue. I find this to be very reassuring. Sometimes people don't even take you up on it, but it's very reassuring to know that you're available to them. Think of it as teaching, not debating. And also, just a reminder, you're going to be learning in the process as well. So be ready for that. And then another kind of green light scenario is you have full capacity. That's a green light. That's when you can proceed. When you have full capacity. So you're well rested, emotionally regulated. You have set aside time for this. You have the mental space to be present, and you're not in crisis mode yourself. So show up fully. Stay curious rather than defensive, and set boundaries around time and scope. Know when to pause or table the discussion. And I speak from experience because, as I've already shared with you very openly about my grief journey, it is complicated. And sometimes I can't predict when it's going to be a really rough day or a rough moment. So I'm always trying to measure and assess my capacity. So this is a really important one. All right. So let's talk about red light, when to walk away. I want you to lean in carefully here because a lot of us need to grasp some of these. Walk away when any of these conditions are present. All right. The first one, they're purely looking for an argument. Like I mentioned earlier, asking gotcha questions, not actually listening to your responses, and more interested in being right than understanding, or repeating their talking points regardless of what you say. So I can see where here's your exit. I can see we're not going to find common ground here. then stop responding. Your energy is better spent elsewhere. And from personal experience, depending on who the person is, when you say that, I can see we're not going to find common ground here. And then stopping right there can infuriate that person who's looking for an argument. But you know what? It empowers you and you walk away. And I am absolutely okay with this. I've practiced this multiple times and it really works. Here's another one. When there's no mutual respect. All right. So personal attacks, not idea discussions, not where you're talking about ideas, but there's just personal attacks. Or when they're dismissing your expertise immediately or talking over you and refusing to listen, making assumptions about your character. Your exit can simply be, I'm happy to discuss this when there's mutual respect. If respect doesn't materialize, you're done. And it usually won't when they're leading in this way. So you don't owe anyone a conversation at the cost of your dignity. So just remember that. And your exit may simply be to turn around and walk away, close the door. You don't even have to respond. Like sometimes that is the best exit strategy. And, again, you don't owe anyone a conversation at the cost of your dignity. All right. Here is another red flag, red light, like stop, you're not going to go here. And that's when you're at capacity. You're already stressed or overwhelmed. You're dealing with personal challenges, burnout from other battles, at the end of a long day or week, crisis period. This is important, but I can't discuss it right now. You could simply say that, that could be your exit. And sometimes you being at capacity, it's not about them. It's really about you. So it could be someone who's maybe generally frustrated and they want to have this, maybe there's respect and all those things are in place, but you're at capacity. So you really have to shut it down. You simply could say, this is important, but I can't discuss it right now. No further explanation is needed. Self-care is essential. We know this. We have to learn how to practice it better at a higher level. And it's not optional. You don't negotiate your self-care and your space when you're at capacity. So practicing that may feel a little awkward for some of you who've never set those boundaries, but practicing it can be very liberating and very empowering and rewarding for you. And you may need to use that in some of these settings during the holidays. The holidays all by themselves can put you at capacity. Just being in that setting with family and friends can be, okay, this is stressful for me just being here and you're at capacity. So you may not be able to have those conversations right then and there about public health. And you have to just be able to shut it down. All right, here's one more. When the setting is wrong or the stakes are just too high. So a very public platform with hostile audiences, professional context requiring organizational approval. You've got 1,000,001 rules through your workplace. When it could damage important relationships and when there's potential legal or HR implications. When the stakes are too high and the setting is wrong, your exit strategy could just simply be, this isn't the appropriate forum for that discussion, or that's outside of my role, and redirect to proper channels or simply decline to engage. Draw that line right there and they can't cross that. Okay, so of course there are times when there's, it's not clearly green, and it's not clearly red. So I have a yellow light, which I'm going to call proceeding with caution. Sometimes the situation isn't clearly green or red, but here's how to handle those, gray areas, or we should say yellow light areas. I'm going to say set boundaries. Your time boundaries could be, I have 15 minutes to discuss this. Stick to your limit, then exit gracefully. It could be that it's a topic boundary. I can address X, but Y is outside of my expertise. Don't let them pull you into everything. Respect boundaries. If this becomes disrespectful, I'll need to stop and follow through immediately. Another thing you can do is test the waters. Start with small engagement, ask clarifying questions first, address their receptivity. You can just testing waters there, and then escalate or de-escalate based on their response. I like the testing the waters because if you're not sure where they're coming from, or, it's in this gray area, this zone of proceeding with caution, this is a great tactic. And then you can bring support. Tag in a colleague. I love doing that. And share resources instead of direct debates. And create a buffer between you and potential conflict. And then finally, another strategy is create your exit strategy. Know how you'll disengage if you need to. Have phrases ready, right? Have those ready, just like you have your introduction or whatever, have that ready. Have those exit strategies ready, especially going into, any friend setting or family setting during holiday time or a certain meeting or gathering where you can anticipate, there's a potential for these kinds of conflicts. Then just have your exit phrases ready. Don't back yourself into a corner and give permission to change your mind mid-conversation. Literally, give yourself permission to change your mind mid-conversation because you may decide, okay, I'm going to have this, but something gets triggered mid-conversation. It doesn't matter whatever it is. You have the right to change your mind and then you can exit that conversation. All right. I think of this as an epidemiologist with a numbers background. We can define success with a numbers game. Here's a little truth that might feel discouraging at first, but it's actually liberating. You won't reach everyone, and that is okay. If you talk to 10 people about public health, maybe 2 will really hear you and change their understanding. Maybe 3 will somewhat be influenced. Maybe 5 won't change at all. 2 out of 10, that's actually a win. Those 2 people will better understand public health, the value of public health. They will share that understanding with their circles. Those 2 people will become allies in your community, and those 2 people will model openness to others. So success really looks like your family understands what you do and why it matters. Your friends can explain public health to others. Success looks like your coworkers speak more clearly about the work, and your community has a few more informed voices. You're still healthy and able to show up tomorrow. That's success. That last one matters most. Sustainable engagement beats heroic burnout every single time. So as I wrap this up, you care about public health. You want your family and friends to understand its value. That care is beautiful. And that's why this work is so hard. You're invested. But here's what I want you to know. Your health matters more than any single conversation. Your sustainability serves the mission better than your burnout. Helping people in your sphere understand is enough. You don't have to fix all the misinformation. You don't have to convince every skeptic. You don't have to defend the entire field. You get to show up where you can with people who matter to you when you have capacity to do it well. I really hope this is resonating and sinking in. Some days that's a lot. Some days that's nothing. Both are okay. The work needs you healthy, not heroic. So choose your conversations wisely. Engage fully when you do. Walk away without guilt when you must. Remember, 2 out of 10 is a win. Keep going. You're making more difference than you realize. Now, a summary of this episode can be found on the show notes page. If you're listening to this and this has resonated with you and this has been helpful, then I'm super happy about that. If you know of someone that needs to hear this, share this with them. All right. The show notes page for this episode, which is episode 435, can be found at phecpodcast.com. Once you're there, just navigate to episode 435 to find the show notes. Now, one more thing before we go. Remember that our podcast now has an app where we can continue the conversations from episodes like this and connect with public health professionals around the world. And I would love to continue this conversation in our community. You can download our PHEC Podcast Community app for Apple or Android devices from your mobile app store. You can also visit phecpodcastcommunity.com to join the community on desktop. All right, everyone. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for listening. The show notes page is where you'll find links to everything we discussed in this episode. To find the show notes for all of our podcast episodes, just visit phecpodcast.com.